Hi, and welcome to my channel. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
International Women's Day is a very important day. It happens every year on the 8th of March. People all over the world celebrate it. This is a day to think about women and their rights. It is a time to remember how much progress women have made and how much work still needs to be done. This day is not only about celebration, it is also about taking action. Imagine a world where everyone is treated equally, no matter if they are a boy or a girl, a man or a woman. That is the main idea behind International Women's Day. It is about gender equality. This means that women and men should have the same opportunities in life. They should have the same rights. They should be able to do the same jobs and get paid the same money. But for a long time, this was not true. In many countries, women could not vote, they could not own property, they often did not have the same education as men. Many people told women that their place was only in the home. International Women's Day started because women wanted to change this. They wanted to be treated fairly. This book tells the story of International Women's Day. It is a story that started more than 100 years ago. It is about brave women who stood up for what they believed in. It is about big changes and also about the challenges that still exist today. Today, International Women's Day is about many things, but at its heart, it is about gender equality and women's rights. Gender equality means that men and women should have the same opportunities and rights in every part of life. Women's rights are about making sure that women are treated fairly and with respect. In the next chapters, we will explore the story of International Women's Day in more detail. We will learn how it began, how it spread around the world, and how people celebrate it today. We will look at the key moments and important people who have shaped this day. From its early beginnings to its global recognition, the story of International Women's Day is a story of hope, action, and the ongoing fight for a better future for women everywhere. The beginning. The story of International Women's Day starts in the early 1900s. At that time, many women around the world wanted more rights. They wanted to vote, they wanted better jobs, they wanted to be treated equally to men. Women in different countries started to organize and speak up. One of the first important events happened in the United States. On the 28th of February 1909, the Socialist Party of America organized a Women's Day in New York City. A woman named Teresa Malkiel, who was an activist, had the idea for this event. Some people have said that this day was created to remember a protest by women workers in 1857. However, historians say this is not true. But the 1909 Women's Day was still a very important start. The idea of a special day for women then spread to Europe. In August 1910, there was a big meeting in Copenhagen, Denmark. This was called the International Socialist Women's Conference. Women from 17 different countries attended. Important women like Clara Zetkin, Kate Dunker, and Paula Tiede from Germany were there. They were inspired by the American Women's Day. These German women suggested that there should be a special Women's Day every year. They did not choose a specific date yet. However, the 100 women at the conference agreed that this was a great idea. They believed that it would help women gain equal rights, including the right to vote. The following year, in 1911, The first official International Women's Day was celebrated. It was held on the 19th of March. More than 1 million people joined the celebrations in Austria, Hungary, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland. In Austria and Hungary, women marched in the streets demanding their rights. They asked for the right to vote and the right to work without discrimination. Over time, International Women's Day became more recognized. In 1913, Russian women celebrated it for the first time. They chose the 8th of March as the date. This later became the official date for International Women's Day around the world. During World War I, women in many countries used this day to protest against the war and demand peace. In 1917, women in Russia organized a large protest on the 8th of March. Their protest helped start a revolution that led to big political changes in their country. As the years passed, more and more countries recognized International Women's Day. It became a day to celebrate women's achievements and to call for equality. In 1977, the United Nations officially recognized the 8th of March as International Women's Day. Today, International Women's Day is celebrated in many ways. Some people join marches and protests. Others attend conferences and events to talk about gender equality. Many companies and organizations use this day to support women's rights and highlight successful women. Even though a lot of progress has been made, there is still work to do. In many countries, women still do not have equal pay. They do not always have the same opportunities as men. Many women face violence and discrimination. This is why International Women's Day is still important. It is a day to celebrate progress, but also a day to remember that the fight for equality is not over. It is a day to take action and work for a future where men and women have the same rights, the same opportunities, and the same respect. Let's continue learning about this important story and the amazing women who made it happen. In 1911, more than 1 million people took part in International Women's Day celebrations. In Vienna, Austria, there were 300 protests. Women marched through the streets carrying flags to honor those who had fought for women's rights in the past. Across Europe, women made important demands. They wanted the right to vote in elections. They wanted to work in government jobs. They also protested against unfair treatment at work, where women were often paid less than men for doing the same job. The first International Women's Day events were focused on demanding basic rights and fair treatment for all women. At the beginning, there was no fixed date for International Women's Day. People celebrated it at different times, usually in late February or early March. In America, people continued to celebrate Women's Day on the last Sunday in February. In Russia, the first International Women's Day celebration happened in 1913. It was held on the last Saturday in February, according to the Russian calendar at the time. This date matched the 8th of March in the calendar used in other countries today. In 1914, International Women's Day was held on the 8th of March in Germany for the first time. Maybe this date was chosen because it was a Sunday that year. Like in other countries, the main focus in Germany was on women's right to vote. However, German women did not get the right to vote until 1918. At the same time in London, there was a march to support women's right to vote. A famous activist, Sylvia Pankhurst, was arrested during this march. She was on her way to speak to people about women's rights. These early celebrations of International Women's Day were very important. They brought women together across different countries to demand change. They showed that many people believed in equality for women and were ready to fight for it. War and Revolution. The early years of International Women's Day were a time of big changes in the world. One of the biggest events was World War I, which started in 1914. This war had a strong effect on women's lives and on International Women's Day. During the war, many men left their jobs to fight. This meant that women had to start working in factories and other places where only men had worked before. Women showed that they could do these jobs just as well as men. At the same time, women in many countries continued to fight for more rights, including the right to vote. International Women's Day became a day to protest against the war and to call for peace. Women believed that peace was important for everyone. They wanted to have a voice in making the world better. One of the most important connections between International Women's Day and history is with the Russian Revolution in 1917. At that time, Russia was in a difficult situation because of World War I. There was not enough food, and people were unhappy. In the Russian capital city, Petrograd, women workers decided to take action. On the 8th of March 1917, which was the 23rd of February in the old Russian calendar, women who worked in textile factories started a demonstration. They went into the streets and demanded bread and peace. They wanted an end to the war, an end to food shortages, and an end to the rule of Tsar Nicholas II, the Russian emperor. International Women's Day was not planned to be the start of a revolution. A Russian revolutionary leader, Leon Trotsky, later wrote about this event. He said that people knew it was International Women's Day and that there might be meetings and protests, but no one expected that this Women's Day would actually begin a revolution. However, on the morning of the 8th of March, women workers in different factories decided to stop working. They encouraged other workers to join them. More and more people joined the strike, and soon, thousands of people were marching in the streets. This demonstration by women on International Women's Day grew bigger and bigger. It became a mass strike and the beginning of big changes. These events are now known as the February Revolution in Russia. Just a few days later, Tsar Nicholas II was forced to step down from power. After this revolution, a new government was formed. The new government made an important decision. On the 15th of March 1917, they granted Russian women the right to vote. This was a huge victory for women in Russia. It showed how powerful their voices could be. After this, the 8th of March became more widely recognized as International Women's Day. Over time, more countries started to celebrate it on this date. In 1921, the Communist International officially declared that the 8th of March would be celebrated as International Women's Day every year. As the years passed, the meaning of International Women's Day continued to grow. It was no longer just about voting rights. It became a day to recognize women's achievements in all areas of life. It also remained a day to demand equal rights, fair pay, and better working conditions. By the mid-1900s, International Women's Day was widely celebrated in socialist and communist countries. In the Soviet Union, it became an official holiday. In China, it was also recognized, and women were given half a day off work on the 8th of March. In the 1970s, International Women's Day gained global recognition. In 1977, the United Nations officially made the 8th of March a global day for women's rights and peace. Since then, the day has been celebrated worldwide. Today, International Women's Day continues to be an important event. Many people celebrate it by honoring the achievements of women in different fields. Others use it as a day to raise awareness about gender equality and to push for change. Even though women have gained many rights over the years, there are still many challenges to overcome. This is why International Women's Day is still relevant. It is not just a day to celebrate, it is also a day to take action. The fight for gender equality is not over. Women around the world continue to demand equal pay, better job opportunities, and an end to discrimination and violence. The story of International Women's Day is a story of courage, determination, and progress. It is a reminder that when people come together and stand up for what is right, real change can happen. The new government in Russia was called the Provisional Government. One of the first things this government did was give women the right to vote. This was a huge victory for women in Russia and for the women's rights movement around the world. Since International Women's Day in 1917 was the start of such important changes in Russia, it became very significant for socialist and communist groups. After the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks, who were the Communist Party in Russia, started celebrating International Women's Day on the 8th of March. They saw it as the day that marked the beginning of the revolution and progress for women's rights in Russia. Over time, especially after the Bolsheviks took full control in the October Revolution, International Women's Day became an important holiday in communist countries and for communist movements around the world. It was a day to remember the women workers of Petrograd and their role in the Russian Revolution. It also became a day to celebrate women's rights and continue the fight for equality and peace, which were central ideas in communist beliefs. The period of war and revolution was a turning point for International Women's Day. It moved from being a day connected to socialist women's movements to being strongly linked with the Russian Revolution and communist ideals. The events of the 8th of March, 1917 in Petrograd showed the power of women to bring about big social and political changes. This confirmed the 8th of March as the official date for International Women's Day, especially within communist and socialist groups growing around the world. After the Russian Revolution, International Women's Day started to spread to more countries. It became very important in places with communist or socialist governments. In these countries, International Women's Day was a time to celebrate women and their role in society. In the Soviet Union, the 8th of March became the official date for International Women's Day. It was a way to remember the women who started the revolution. In 1965, International Women's Day became a public holiday in the Soviet Union. This meant people did not have to work on this day, and it was a time to celebrate women's achievements. Big celebrations such as parades were common in countries like Czechoslovakia. China also began celebrating International Women's Day in 1922. Chinese communists started observing the day, and by 1949, when the People's Republic of China was established, the 8th of March became an official holiday for women. Women in China were given half a day off work to mark the occasion. In 1927, a large march took place in Guangzhou with 2,5,0,0 women and men showing their support for women's rights. Even in countries that were not communists, International Women's Day was starting to gain attention. In Australia, the first celebrations happened in 1928. A group called the Militant Women's Group organized a rally in Sydney. These women demanded equal pay for equal work and paid holidays. Later, in 1931, there were marches in Sydney and Melbourne, and more women joined these marches each year. In 1938, a large meeting in Perth brought together women from many different groups, all supporting International Women's Day. In Spain, during a difficult time before the Spanish Civil War, a communist leader named Dolores Ibarruri led a women's march in Madrid in 1936. This showed that even in times of political problems, women still wanted to fight for their rights. From the 1920s to the 1960s, International Women's Day slowly continued to spread around the world. In the United States, a group called the Congress of American Women was formed on International Women's Day in 1946. This group was connected to a larger international organization called the Women's International Democratic Federation. The Women's International Democratic Federation was created in 1945 in Paris. The Congress of American Women supported equal rights for women and worked to improve conditions for women in the workplace and at home. It was part of a growing movement that aimed to make sure women had the same rights and opportunities as men. As International Women's Day continued to spread, more people around the world recognized its importance. It was no longer just a day for socialist and communist groups. It was becoming a global day for women's rights, equality, and justice. Even though progress was being made, many women still faced discrimination. They were often paid less than men, had fewer job opportunities, and were expected to take care of the home instead of working outside. Because of this, International Women's Day remained an important day to push for change. In the years that followed, more countries began celebrating International Women's Day. Governments, organizations, and activists around the world used this day to speak out for women's rights. The movement continued to grow, and more people joined the fight for gender equality. International Women's Day had started as a small movement, but by the mid-20th century, it had become a powerful symbol of women's strength and determination. It was a reminder that women's voices mattered and that they could bring real change. As we move forward in the story of International Women's Day, we will see how it became even more influential and how it spread to every corner of the world. Women fought for their rights at home and at work. They also supported workers' rights and equal rights for everyone, no matter their background. Although some people saw International Women's Day as connected to communist ideas, many different types of women joined the movement, including those who were not communists. The Women's International Democratic Federation became an important group for women's rights around the world. It helped women from different countries connect and share ideas on how to improve women's lives. This showed that International Women's Day was not just for one country. It was a day for women everywhere to come together and work for a better future. In Singapore in 1956, women in the People's Action Party created a women's league. They organized rallies on International Women's Day, showing that the day was becoming important in Asia. By 1958, International Women's Day was also being celebrated in places like Trinidad and Tobago, and in 1965, it was marked for the first time in Afghanistan. These examples show that from 1920 to 1960, International Women's Day started to spread to many different parts of the world. It was no longer just celebrated in socialist and communist countries where it had begun. Slowly, it was growing into a global day for women, a day of action. In the late 1960s, something changed for International Women's Day. For many years, it was mostly celebrated in communist countries, but now, a new group of women started to see its importance again. These women were part of what is called the second wave feminist movement. They wanted big changes for women in society. For these feminists, International Women's Day was not just a holiday. It became a day of action. In Europe, some people even called it Women's International Day of Struggle. It was a time to fight for important things that would make women's lives better and more equal. In the 1970s and 1980s, many groups joined the feminists to celebrate International Women's Day. These groups included people from left-wing political movements and workers' groups. They all marched together and spoke out about what they wanted to change. What were these important issues? One major issue was equal pay. Women often did the same work as men but did not receive the same amount of money. People on International Women's Day said this was unfair. They demanded equal pay for equal work. Another important issue was reproductive rights. This meant that women wanted to have control over their own bodies and decisions about having children. They wanted the right to choose if and when to have children, and they wanted access to safe health care. Ending violence against women was also a major goal. Women faced violence at home, in the streets, and at work. People used International Women's Day to speak out against domestic violence, sexual harassment, and other forms of violence against women. They called for better laws and protection to keep women safe. International Women's Day in the USA. In the United States, International Women's Day had been almost forgotten for many years. But then, in 1969, a woman named Laura X helped bring it back to life. She organized a march on International Women's Day in Berkeley, California. This march was a turning point for International Women's Day in the USA. Laura X's work led to something else important: the creation of the Women's History Research Center. This center became a place to collect information and documents about the women's rights movement. It helped people learn about the history of women fighting for their rights. Laura X believed that women deserved more than just one day a year. She thought there should be an entire month to celebrate women's history. She worked hard to make this happen. Along with other activists, she asked the government to create a National Women's History Month around International Women's Day in March. Thanks to their efforts, they were successful. Now, in the United States, March is Women's History Month. It is a time to remember and celebrate the achievements of women in history and to continue the fight for gender equality. A day of action around the world. International Women's Day became a day to celebrate the achievements of women throughout history. In different parts of the world, it also became a day of action. In Australia, big marches started in 1972. Women marched for equal pay and better rights at work. In 1979, in Iran, women protested against new laws that were taking away their rights. In 1984, in Argentina, after a long period of military rule, women held large demonstrations to demand their rights again. The second wave feminist movement made International Women's Day important once more. It was no longer just a holiday, it became a powerful day for women to come together, speak out, and demand change. It became a day of action for equality, respect, and a better world for women. The UN and beyond. International Women's Day became even bigger when the United Nations UN started celebrating it in 1975, which was the International Women's Year. 2 years later, in 1977, the UN officially asked all its member countries to choose a day each year to celebrate women's rights and international peace. Many countries chose March 8th, which had already been the traditional day for International Women's Day. The UN plays a big role in making sure International Women's Day is recognized around the world. Every year, the UN chooses a special theme for the day. This theme helps to focus attention on important issues for women. Over the years, the UN themes have covered many topics. In 1996, the theme was Celebrating the Past, Planning for the Future, looking back at the history of women's rights, and thinking about what still needed to be done. In 1997, the theme was Women and the Peace Table, highlighting the importance of women in peace negotiations. In 1999, the theme was A World Free of Violence Against Women, focusing on ending violence against women and girls. In the 2000s, themes continued to address important issues. In 2006, the theme was Women in Decision-Making, encouraging more women to become leaders. In 2011, the theme was Equal Access to Education, Training, and Science and Technology, showing how these things are important for women's careers. In 2014, the theme was Equality for Women is Progress for All, showing that when women are treated equally, society benefits. More recently, themes have connected women's rights to global issues. In 2022, the theme was Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow, linking women's rights to climate action. In 2023, the theme was Digital Innovation and Technology for Gender Equality, focusing on how technology can help women. In 2024, the theme is Invest in Women, Accelerate Progress, calling for more investment in women and girls, business and commercial influence. As International Women's Day became more popular, businesses also started to get involved. Companies began sponsoring events and using the day in their advertising. In 2001, a website called internationalwomensday.com was launched. This website, run by a marketing company, promotes hashtags and themes for the day. Sometimes these themes are different from the ones chosen by the UN. However, corporate involvement has led to some criticism. Some people feel that International Women's Day has become too commercial. They worry that the focus has shifted away from real issues of women's rights and instead has become a way for companies to sell products or services. Critics say that some companies use International Women's Day to look good, but they do not actually make real changes to help women in their own businesses or around the world. For example, some companies say they support women's rights, but they do not pay women equally or do not provide good working conditions for female employees. Another criticism is that some messages on International Women's Day are too general. Instead of talking about important issues like equal pay or stopping violence against women, companies sometimes just say, "Happy Women's Day," as if it were like Mother's Day, without pushing for real change. Despite these concerns, International Women's Day continues to be a powerful and important event. It reminds the world that women's rights matter and that there is still work to do to achieve true equality. The role of online platforms and the UN's impact. The website internationalwomensday.com has become a central place for information and activities related to International Women's Day. It offers resources, news, and ways for people to get involved. While this website has helped spread awareness of International Women's Day, its corporate nature also shows a wider trend of businesses using the day for marketing. Despite some criticisms about the commercialization of International Women's Day, the United Nations, UN, has played an important role in making it a global event. The UN's themes help to keep the focus on important issues, even as businesses and different organizations celebrate the day in their own ways. International Women's Day each year. International Women's Day happens every year on the 8th of March. It is a time to think about women's rights and what still needs to change. Over the years, many important things have happened on or around this day. Here are some examples from recent years. In 1995 people in Glasgow, Scotland, remembered the history of women's voting. A special sign was placed next to a tree that had been planted years ago to celebrate women getting the right to vote. In 1996, a new magazine for Sami women was created. The Sami are an indigenous group in Northern Europe. The magazine, called Gaba, talked about the lives and experiences of Sami women. In 2003, a concert was held to help Afghan women who had to leave their homes. Music was used to raise money and awareness for these women. In 2008, something brave happened in Saudi Arabia. At that time, women were not allowed to drive. On International Women's Day, a woman named Ahia Al-Huwaider drove a car to show that women should have the right to drive. She filmed it and shared it online, and the video was seen around the world. In 2009, in Norway, a woman named Sara Asme Rasmussen burned a veil as a symbolic protest against rules that force women to wear veils. This action started a big discussion about freedom and women's choices. In 2011, the world celebrated 100 years of International Women's Day. Many countries marked this important date. In the United States, President Obama declared March as Women's History Month. In Australia, a special coin was made to remember 100 years of International Women's Day. However, in Egypt, during protests for women's rights, some women were harassed by men, showing that there was still a long way to go for gender equality. In 2012, the charity Oxfam asked people to send cards to women who inspired them. This was a way to show appreciation for women's contributions. In 2013, the United Nations focused on violence against women and called for urgent action to stop it. In India, the first medical college just for women was opened by the government. In 2014, something unique happened. A new tradition called International Women's Collaboration Brew Day began. On this day, women in the beer industry around the world brewed the same type of beer to show that women play a role in this field too. In 2015, People remembered the Beijing Declaration, a plan for women's rights from 20 years earlier. Amnesty International partnered with Tinder, a dating app, to educate young people about women's rights online. However, in China, 5 women were arrested for planning to give out stickers against sexual harassment. This led to protests around the world, and these women became known as the Feminist Five. In 2016, the One campaign, started by Bono, focused on how poverty affects women. Meanwhile, Air India celebrated International Women's Day by operating a flight crewed only by women to highlight women's role in aviation. In 2017, the UN warned that women's rights were still limited in many parts of the world. In Jakarta, Indonesia, women marched for equal rights and safety. In 2018, the Me Too movement became a global movement. Women around the world used the Me Too hashtag on social media to share their personal experiences of sexual harassment and assault. On the same day in 2018, the fast food company McDonald's made a surprising change. It flipped its famous M logo upside down to look like a W for women to celebrate International Women's Day, a day that continues to evolve. As these events show, International Women's Day is more than just a celebration. It is a day of action, protest, and reflection. It continues to grow and change each year as new challenges and issues arise. While some people criticize its commercialization, many still use this day to fight for equality and justice. No matter how it is celebrated, International Women's Day remains a powerful reminder that the struggle for women's rights is not over. Around the world, people use this day to honor the past, recognize the present, and work for a better future for women everywhere. International Women's Day in recent years. In 2019, Berlin, the capital of Germany, made International Women's Day a public holiday. In Mexico City, a special monument was built to honor women who were killed because of gender-based violence. In 2020, despite the COVID-19 pandemic, women still marched in many cities. In Mexico, women organized a Day Without Women strike. They stayed home from work and school to show what the world would be like without women. In 2021, Burger King, a fast food chain, made a big mistake on Twitter. They posted the message, "Women belong in the kitchen," on International Women's Day. They meant to highlight the need for more women chefs, but the message was seen as sexist, and they had to apologize. In India, there was good news for women's sports. It was announced that the women's cricket team would play a test match against England, showing progress in gender equality in sports. In 2022, as the war in Ukraine started, women in Russia protested against the war on International Women's Day. They placed flowers at war memorials to remember the civilians who died in Ukraine. In 2023, in Japan, people protested for women to have the choice to keep their last names after getting married. In Kosovo, women threw smoke bombs to protest against violence against women. The UN theme for 2023 was Technology and Gender Equality, focusing on how digital innovation can help women. In 2024, France became the first country to include the right to abortion in its constitution. Meanwhile, in Ireland, there was a vote about changing the constitution to make it more equal for women, but people voted no. The UN theme for 2024 was Invest in Women, calling for more funding and support for women's progress. These examples show that International Women's Day is a day of action, protests, celebrations, and reflection. Each year, the focus changes, but the goal remains the same: to fight for a world where women and men are equal. International Women's Day today. Today, International Women's Day is a global event. It is a time for people all over the world to recognize women's achievements and to continue pushing for gender equality. It is amazing to see how this day, which started more than a century ago, is still so important in modern life. In some countries, International Women's Day is a public holiday. For example, in Afghanistan, Russia, Cuba, and Vietnam, people have a day off work to celebrate the occasion. In China, it is a holiday specifically for women, showing how these countries recognize the importance of women's roles in society. In many other countries, International Women's Day is not an official holiday, but it is still widely celebrated. Countries like Australia, Cameroon, Italy, and Romania do not give people a day off, but you can find events, marches, and discussions happening everywhere. People use this day to talk about women's rights and to celebrate women's contributions in different fields. One beautiful tradition on International Women's Day is giving gifts and flowers to women. This custom is popular in many countries. In Italy, for example, it is traditional for men to give yellow mimosa flowers to women. This tradition started after World War II, and today, the yellow mimosa has become a symbol of International Women's Day in Italy, Russia, and other countries that were part of the Soviet Union. These flowers are a small but meaningful way to show appreciation and respect for women. In some countries, such as Bulgaria and Romania, International Women's Day is also celebrated like Mother's Day. Children give presents to their mothers and grandmothers, showing love and appreciation for the women in their families. However, the history of International Women's Day is not viewed the same way everywhere. In some places, its meaning has changed over time. For example, in the Czech Republic, the way people see International Women's Day is different because of its history. International Women's Day has come a long way, from fighting for voting rights in the early 1900s to being a global celebration and movement for gender equality today. It continues to grow and evolve, bringing people together to work toward a world where everyone, no matter their gender, has equal opportunities, respect, and rights. The influence of the Soviet Union on International Women's Day. During the time of communism, International Women's Day was a big state-sponsored celebration in many countries. The government organized parades, speeches, and events to honor women's contributions to society. However, after the end of communism, the popularity of International Women's Day declined in some places. Some people saw it as a symbol of the old regime and no longer wanted to celebrate it. But in 2004, it was officially brought back as an important day in some countries. This shows that even in places with a complicated history, the core message of International Women's Day remains relevant. Even if people have different views on its past, the goal of gender equality continues to be important. Why International Women's Day still matters. Despite its varied history and the different ways it is celebrated across the world, the main idea of International Women's Day remains strong. It is still an important time to think about the issues women face today. Women around the world continue to fight for equal pay. Women still earn less than men in many jobs, even when they do the same work. Equal opportunities. Women often do not get the same chances for education, leadership positions, or career growth. Safety and respect. Many women still face harassment, violence, and discrimination in their daily lives. Even though progress has been made, there is still much work to do. International Women's Day is a yearly reminder of these challenges. It is also a chance for people to speak up, take action, and work for a better future, a step towards a more equal world. Today, International Women's Day is a vital part of the ongoing journey towards a world where gender equality is a reality. Every year, it encourages people to learn, reflect, and take action. It is a day of hope, a day of activism, and a day of celebration. The fight for gender equality is not just for women. It is for everyone. When women are treated equally, society as a whole becomes stronger, fairer, and more successful. Thank you for learning with us. Hey there, just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, but it really helps us create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.